I stared at the blue leather passport holder resting beside my laptop every morning before work. It had belonged to my father until the year before he died, and when he handed it to me, he smiled and said, "Important journeys deserve careful hands." I kept it on my desk even when I wasn't traveling because it reminded me that responsibility wasn't something you announced. It was something you practiced. I'm Emily Carter, 34 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant for a regional financial consulting firm in Denver. My job revolves around tracing transactions that people hope nobody will notice. Ironically, the one financial betrayal that hurt me most came from someone I never imagined I would have to investigate. My husband, Daniel, spent nearly 6 weeks planning what was supposed to be our first real vacation in almost 3 years. He compared hotel reviews, watched airline prices every evening at exactly 7:30, and even created a shared spreadsheet listing everyone's arrival times so my mother, my older brother Ryan, and his family could all meet at the same airport terminal without confusion. Daniel wasn't trying to impress anyone. He simply believed family vacations worked better when someone quietly handled the details. At 8:17 a.m. on Tuesday, May 14th, while Daniel was labeling luggage tags in our dining room, my phone buzzed with a fraud alert. Airway Skylines. $3,842.76. Transaction approved. For exactly 4 airline tickets. Not ours. I opened the banking app expecting to find some obvious mistake. Instead, I recognized the reservation immediately. The destination matched the family vacation Daniel had spent weeks organizing. Only someone else had purchased 4 first-class seats using my credit card. My hands stayed perfectly still. Years of examining financial records had taught me that panic rarely uncovered the truth. Details did. Merchant number. Authorization code. Timestamp. Everything looked legitimate. Too legitimate. Daniel walked in carrying the blue suitcase we'd bought for our honeymoon years earlier. "Everything okay?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately. I simply turned the phone toward him. He read the amount once. Then again. Neither of us spoke. The silence somehow felt heavier than shouting ever could. Before I could call the bank, another notification appeared. This one wasn't from the credit card company. It was from my mother. I booked everyone's flights. "You make the most money anyway." Then, almost as an afterthought, another message followed. "If you can't afford it, stay home." I read that sentence twice. Not because I misunderstood it. Because I realized she genuinely believed it was reasonable. That wasn't even the part that hurt the most. The painful part was recognizing the phrase. She had used different versions of it my entire life whenever someone questioned her decisions. It wasn't just a sentence. It was a family rule disguised as practical advice. Looking back now, I should have recognized it as a warning instead of a personality quirk. But families have a remarkable ability to normalize what outsiders would immediately question. Here's what my mother didn't know that Tuesday morning, and what none of us understood until weeks later. The airline reservation she made using my card didn't simply trigger a dispute. It became one small piece of a much larger federal investigation. And the last image I can still see as clearly as that fraud alert wasn't the charge itself. It was me standing in an airport terminal months later, the blue leather passport holder clutched in my hand, watching 2 FBI agents walk directly toward my mother while every conversation around us quietly came to a stop. Here's what my mother didn't know about that morning and about the years that led to it. People usually imagine that a family falls apart because of one dramatic argument. Mine didn't. It happened through dozens of small moments that taught everyone the same lesson. Whatever my mother wanted eventually became everyone else's responsibility. The blue leather passport holder followed me through every family trip we ever took. Dad always handed it back to me after airport security because he trusted me not to lose it. After he passed away, I kept carrying it, even when I traveled alone. Somewhere along the way, it stopped representing vacations and started representing accountability, something that seemed to disappear whenever my mother's wishes entered the room. Our family's ranking system was never spoken aloud. Ryan, my older brother by 4 years, came first because, according to Mom, he needed more help. His wife, Melissa, naturally inherited that protection. Their two children could do no wrong because they were the grandchildren. Mom placed herself somewhere above everyone else, claiming years of sacrifice gave her permanent authority. I came last. Not because she loved me less, at least that's what I told myself, but because I was dependable. Dependable people, in my mother's world, became resources. I earned a comfortable salary investigating financial misconduct for businesses across Colorado. Every promotion somehow became proof that I could absorb another unexpected expense. A birthday dinner I hadn't agreed to host. Ryan's overdue utility bill because he's between opportunities. Hotel upgrades that somehow landed on my credit card after someone conveniently forgot theirs. Each incident was small enough to excuse. Together, they formed a pattern I refused to name. Daniel noticed it long before I did. He had a habit of making fresh coffee every Saturday morning before I woke up. He always poured mine into the same navy blue ceramic mug with a tiny chip near the handle because he knew it was my favorite. Those little acts of attention never came with speeches or expectations. They simply happened, quietly, because kindness was normal to him. When Mom announced she wanted everyone to vacation together in Scottsdale that spring, Daniel volunteered to organize everything. He built a spreadsheet listing flight options, hotel confirmations, rental car information, and emergency contacts. Every household would reserve and pay for its own tickets. It wasn't complicated, just organized. On April 28th at 6:42 p.m., Daniel emailed the finalized itinerary to the family group. I followed it with a message that read, "Just confirming everyone is purchasing their own airfare. Hotel reservations remain linked so we'll all stay together." Ryan replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Melissa answered, "Looks perfect." Even my Aunt Linda wrote, "Thanks for keeping this simple." At 7:03 p.m., Mom finally responded, "Fine by me." Then, less than a minute later, she added another message that almost nobody acknowledged. "Plans change. If you can't afford it, stay home." Ryan reacted with a laughing emoji. Melissa typed, "Classic Mom." I stared at the screen for a second before locking my phone. Daniel glanced over and asked, "Everything settled?" I smiled and nodded. "It is now." I genuinely believed it. After all, we had everything in writing, everyone had agreed, and there were 5 other people who had witnessed the conversation. For the first time in years, I thought careful planning had removed any room for misunderstanding. I didn't realize my mother had never confused the agreement. She had simply decided it didn't apply to her. The illusion lasted exactly 16 days. At 8:17 a.m. on Tuesday, May 14th, my phone vibrated with a fraud alert. By 8:21, I had already compared the airline confirmation number against Daniel's itinerary. The reservation matched our family trip perfectly. The only difference was that 4 first-class tickets had been purchased instead of the economy seats everyone had agreed to buy for themselves. At 8:24, my mother's text arrived. "I upgraded us. Consider it helping family." I typed one sentence. "You used my credit card without permission." 3 gray dots appeared almost immediately. "If you can't afford it, stay home." There it was again. The same sentence she had used for years whenever someone questioned her. It wasn't an explanation. It was a dismissal, a way of ending conversations before anyone else could have won. Daniel was standing at the kitchen island sealing luggage with bright orange travel straps. The suitcases were finished. The printed boarding reminders sat neatly beside them. His color-coded itinerary was clipped to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like Colorado. Everything he had spent weeks preparing suddenly looked strangely fragile. He read my mother's message without saying a word. Instead of slamming a cabinet or demanding that I call her back, he quietly removed the luggage tags one by one. The soft tearing sound of each paper tag somehow hurt more than if he had shouted. "I'll unpack," he said calmly. "Let's wait," I answered, though I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. He gave me a gentle smile. "I'm unpacking the bags," he said. "Not giving up on us." That distinction stayed with me. While he carried the first suitcase upstairs, memories I had carefully filed away began surfacing all at once. The time Mom volunteered me to pay for Ryan's engagement dinner because I had the stable career. The Christmas when she switched everyone's Secret Santa assignments after gifts had already been purchased because Ryan wanted something more expensive. The weekend she borrowed my emergency credit card for what she called a temporary expense, returning it months later without mentioning the charges. Every incident had come with the same expectation. Emily will understand. Emily won't make this awkward. Emily can afford it. Standing alone in the kitchen, I realized something that was deeply uncomfortable. I had spent years believing I was simply being generous. That wasn't entirely true. Sometimes I stayed quiet because silence was easier than conflict. Sometimes I accepted unfairness because I wanted peace more than justice. My mother's behavior belonged to her, but my willingness to normalize it belonged to me. That realization hurt in a different way. Not sharper, cleaner. At 9:02 a.m., I called my older brother, Ryan. He answered on the second ring, sounding distracted. "So, Mom told you," he asked before I could speak. "I just want to know if you knew she was using my card." A long pause followed. Then he sighed. "I figured she'd sort it out with you afterward." "You knew." "It isn't a big deal, Emily. She was trying to keep everyone together." I closed my eyes. It became a big deal the moment she used my name to pay for it. Ryan laughed softly as though I were missing the obvious. "Don't make this into something it doesn't have to be." For the first time that morning, I realized I wasn't dealing with one person's decision. I was confronting a family system that depended on everyone pretending the rules only applied to certain people. And I was no longer sure I wanted to keep pretending. I ended the call with Ryan at 9:11 a.m. and sat quietly for almost 10 minutes before opening my laptop. Anger kept offering me faster responses than wisdom. The first message I drafted to my mother was only one sentence. "You stole from me and I'm done protecting you." I read it once and deleted it. The second draft was longer. It listed every unpaid loan, every family dinner, every vacation deposit, and every excuse I had swallowed over the previous 11 years. It was accurate, but it wasn't useful. I highlighted the entire page and pressed delete again. At 9:26 a.m., I finally sent the only message that mattered. The airfare purchased on my credit card was unauthorized. I've reported the transaction to my bank as required under my employment policies. If the funds are returned before the investigation concludes, I hope this can remain a private family matter. If not, the process will continue without my involvement. Her reply arrived less than 3 minutes later. "If you can't afford it, stay home. Nothing else." She still believed shame would make me retreat. Instead, I answered every question from my bank's fraud investigator with the same precision I used in my profession. I supplied timestamps, screenshots, emails confirming each household would purchase its own tickets, and the text in which my mother admitted making the purchase. 2 weeks later, the investigator called. "This case isn't isolated," she explained. The airline referred several linked complaints involving unauthorized bookings made through the same travel agency. Because multiple states are involved, federal investigators have requested supporting documentation. I thanked her and hung up. I never called the FBI. The paperwork simply reached them through the ordinary process that exists when enough unrelated complaints point toward the same pattern. Months later, while Daniel and I were finally leaving for a much smaller vacation we had planned ourselves, I carried the blue leather passport holder through security. Near the departure gate, I noticed 2 suited agents speaking quietly with airport security before walking toward a familiar face. My mother. She looked confused rather than frightened. For the first time in my life, no one rushed to explain things away for her. No one asked me to intervene. I simply stood beside Daniel and watched as the conversation moved into a nearby office. The investigation that followed uncovered several unauthorized purchases affecting different relatives over several years. Some family members had quietly repaid the charges themselves to avoid conflict. Others had never even realized who had paid. The consequences were legal, financial, and deeply embarrassing. None of them were created by me. Several months after everything concluded, my mother appeared at our front door carrying a plain white envelope. I didn't invite her inside immediately. She waited. When we finally sat together, she tried familiar phrases about family loyalty and misunderstanding, but they sounded smaller than they once had. Eventually, she asked one question without anger. Is there any way back? I told her there was one condition. It doesn't begin with me. It begins with Daniel. He spent years cleaning up messes he didn't create. If you want a place in our lives again, start there. She nodded. The conversation that followed between the two of them happened privately. I never asked Daniel to repeat every word, and he never volunteered them. Some moments become more meaningful because they remain between the people who earned them. A year later, family vacations looked different. Everyone booked their own flights using their own cards while sitting around the same dining table. My mother quietly placed her credit card on the table before making any reservation. No speeches. No declarations. Just a small gesture that told us she finally understood trust had to be visible. As I slipped the blue leather passport holder into my carry-on for another trip with Daniel, I realized my father had been right all along. Important journeys do deserve careful hands. Just not because of where they take you. Because of what they teach you to stop carrying. 4 flights. $3,842.76. One decision at 8:17 a.m. The strongest families aren't built by protecting the truth from consequences. They're built by protecting each other with the truth.